Welcome to HDTV. You're now rocking with your boy. Hmm, Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. The FritoLay strike and how to support the workers. Consumers can support workers with their pocketbooks and politics. Workers at a Frito-Lay plant in Topeka, Kansas have been on strike for more than 2 weeks asking for better working conditions and pay. The way they tell it, they've got good reason to take action. Some of the plant's 850 employees have been subjected to forced overtime and working 84-hour work weeks with no days off. One worker wrote a public letter to the company describing an harrowing scene where a coworker collapsed on the job and died. The people in charge, she wrote, had us move the body and put it in another coworker to keep the line going. Frito-Lay says it's committed to providing a safe and fair workplace and has offered a 2-year contract it believes addresses workers' concerns, including capping required work schedules at 60 hours a week. Thus far, the sides haven't reached an agreement. The strike has garnered quite a bit of attention in the media and online, as tends to happen with collective worker actions. Amazon workers' recent failed push to unionize in Alabama or presidential candidates showing up on stop and shop picket lines. As also tends to happen, there's discussion among members of the public of how to support the workers. The best way to do that isn't always clear. Social media posts help raise public awareness, but they don't accomplish much tangibly. The effectiveness of boycotts can vary, and focusing on a single company's bad actions can muddle the bigger systemic picture. Mark McCarter, a palletizer and steward at Frito-Lay in Topeka, told Vice that he and his coworkers would rather nobody buy any Frito-Lay products as long as the strike lasts, including Fritos, Doritos, Tostitos, Funyuns, and Cheetos. He said they would prefer people avoid products from parent company PepsiCo too. That's a bit different from Amazon workers earlier this year who specifically said they were not calling for a boycott. In light of all this, I reached out to Kate Bang. This is the lady who wrote the article, Emily. I believe that's her name. Yeah, Emily Stewart. She basically okay. She reached out to Kate Bain, the Director of Labor Market Policy and Interim Chief Economist at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, to discuss what's going on. They talked about the evolving public conversation around worker rights, what it means for people to be paying attention, and how individuals can best direct their energies if they want to make work fairer and safer. Hint, the best way to help Frito-Lay workers may not be to stop buying Doritos for 2 weeks, but instead to support pro-labor politicians and policies. Our conversation, lightly edited for length and clarity, is basically below, in the sense that there's been more attention to worker rights among the general public lately. Is that right? And is that good? People are paying more attention, what sort of see as an inflection point in the hashtag ref for red movement. Red for ed, excuse me. A series of teacher strikes and protests that began in 2018, which exemplified a new wave of labor movement and a new wave of awareness. There's research from that period of time that shows that people became more aware because it affected their daily lives. One study looks at parents with children in schools versus parents of children who are slightly younger who are not in schools. It found that parents who were faced with more labor activism became not only more sympathetic to those labor activists in the hashtag Red for Ed movement, but also expressed more interest in collective action in their own workplaces. Around Frito-Lay specifically, there have been questions about whether to boycott its products or PepsiCo's, its parent company. Finally, one of the company workers came out and said people shouldn't buy those companies' products while they're striking. Should consumer wait for workers on directives like this? Absolutely. You always follow the workers' lead. Broadly speaking, boycotts are primarily for raising public awareness versus causing major economic harm to some of these companies. It's more about fostering solidarity. That's the perception of where boycotts come from. It's like a public image campaign, and it puts a lot more pressure on the company if there is broad awareness that they're not doing right by their workers. That makes sense, and something similar did happen with Amazon workers trying to unionize in Alabama this year, but the ask was sort of the opposite. Workers didn't ask for a boycott, and some people called for it anyway. Again, that's where you say you follow the lead of workers, because the fact that workers are working with union organizers and strategists and people who have a handle on the best way to raise public awareness. In some cases and some products, it may be useful to have a boycott. In some cases, like Amazon, they defer to the fact that workers are experts at their jobs and are working with people who are experts on union campaigns. They know more than the regular consumer. But is the public getting smarter about worker rights overall? It has continued to evolve, particularly early in the pandemic. There was some action on workplace safety. It brought to the fore long-standing workplace safety issues. It reached a boiling point and maybe a point where people were able to be more perceptive because they were all dealing with a public health crisis. There were concerns about the health of people who worked in grocery stores, and people were also afraid to go to the grocery stores and understood the threat in the same ways. They've had 40 years of rising income inequality and has just reached a threshold where people are beginning to recognize that a lot of what has caused these broad trends in income inequality and economic inequality. Broadly speaking, there's a lot of power disparity in the economy. They can't have an efficient allocation of resources in a really disparate power structure. Some of the ways to address these huge long-term economic trends is by rebalancing power, and that is done through things like the labor movement. Should they be surprised that some of the condition workers are still facing? Some of the problems the FritoLay workers are describing are quite disturbing. They don't think so, again, because of these broad trends. The wide scale attacks on the labor movement that began in the late 1970s and early 1980s chipped away at the social infrastructure that was needed to protect workers. Effective Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or you call them OSHA, enforcement has been diminished. There isn't a high enough density of unions to ensure that workplaces are safe. These are long-term trends. One could certainly argue that it got worse in the last 4 years because some of the tools they had to address some of these big effects of economic inequality and how it affects workers and workplaces were chipped away. There were obviously not a lot of great staffing at the executive level, a lot of intentional diminishing of the federal workforce, and they really need those type of institutions. The economy does not take care of these sort of problems. The economic evidence points to the fact that the economy will not just self-regulate to ensure that workplaces are safe, and they need institutions, meaning the government and the labor movement, to rebalance power. For a lot of consumers, it feels good to be able to do something to at least feel like they can support workers' movements, whether it means tweeting out a hashtag or boycotting or whatever. But is that really helpful? Does deciding not to buy Doritos for a week make a difference? It's good for people to have awareness. Boycotts and social media are tools that do help to raise public awareness. But what needs to happen is policy reform, both changing labor law and improving the functioning of the Department of Labor after 4 years of being gutted. That is what they actually need to turn the tide against these exploitative forces. In order to make those policy changes, they do need more public support, so people are voting for more pro-labor politicians and are putting pressure on politicians to pass legislation that help workers. That is what they ultimately need. It's not going to be one-off boycotts based on whatever worker collective action got more attention in the media, but a step in doing that is raising public awareness. Okay. You digging a little more on what some larger scale fixes would be here. It's easy to think you did a tweet about the Frito-Lay workers or whatever and feel like you helped. They feel good when we do these individual actions, but it gives you an excuse to think it is just about Frito-Lay. It's not. It's broad trends in economic inequality and outsized corporate power. What they need are things like broad structural change. A first step is the Protect the Rights to Organize Act, the PRO Act, which is a bill that has been reintroduced on the Hill multiple times that will make it easier for workers to unionize. That's the first step toward diminishing some of the barriers that they've seen towards unionization across the board. Employers are very comfortable with breaking the law and violating worker labor rights because there's very little recourse. So why wouldn't they do illegal things to prevent unionization if they can get away with it, or if the fines are very minimal? It is good to unionize in the old model, but there's been a restructuring in the economy that means that they need to think expansively toward the future. They have very large companies that have power across the nation. They have a fissured workplace, meaning that, well, we have a fissured workplace, meaning that, for example, maybe the people who clean at the FritoLay factory are not actually employed by FritoLay, but are employed by a third party. And so if you have joint employer standards, it would mean that if you're the person cleaning and work for a contractor, but at FritoLay, then FritoLay does have some responsibility for workplace safety, even though they're not your direct employer. The next step from that would be something like sectoral bargaining. There are proposals that will make it easier to organize and bargain across sectors, even in the absence of actual collective bargaining agreements. There could be things like worker councils that would help establish workplace safety and job quality standards. We need those first steps of passing the PRO Act and raising the minimum wage, the broad suite of policies that have been reintroduced year after year and have not gained much ground. And then we need to think about how the economy has changed over the past 50 years and how we need to reform our institutions and our laws to reflect the current structure of the economy. If the answers are really policies and enforcement, then what should a normal consumer do? How are you supposed to help? The old adage that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism is true. We aren't going to make broad scale change through individual consumption choices. The economic hit that FritoLay may experience for the next couple of weeks is not going to make them change their whole business model. If their business model is based on exploitation, that is their bottom line, diminishing their profit margin for a couple of weeks is not going to make them fundamentally restructured. People can engage in movement building like the racial justice movement last summer and going to protests and joining picket lines. They can advocate with policymakers by voting for the policymakers who pass pro-labor reform and holding them accountable, putting pressure on them. We need both. History has shown us that we need movement building alongside policy reform. You can't have one or the other. So basically, this happens at UPS as well. Like UPS, our union, got tricked into signing this contract that really has let the company be able to work us to the bone, or sometimes worse. So the next contract we have, it's gonna be a real shitstorm. So I understand what Frito-Lay is going through. Your union is supposed to protect you, but some of these unions in different cities, I don't know like how they do it in Topeka because I'm not there, but in different cities, especially the one I'm in, with UPS, the union is weak. The union is very weak. They don't really help you. They're really helping the supervisors because they're all buddies. They go out to drink together, smoke or whatever together, whatever they do. And they basically find a way how to screw you. Now they get you out of some things, like if you're in trouble about missing or something happens, then the union come in to help you. But that's the only time they're helpful, is if you're like about to lose your job or you're having troubles like with the supervisor. That's it. They don't talk about the policies or the short changing of money or work. And these are the things we got to talk about. Not only the black community, but you heard them. You have to change the policy. You have to put the pressure on the politicians, because America is a corporation. They are for the corporation. And what you're supposed to do with the representatives and the congressmen or women are, they are a representation of you. So if you put pressure on them and put pressure on what they're trying to do and put pressure on saying that you're not going to re-elect them, if they don't do their job, you will see more things done. And this is what I've been trying to stress to the black Americans and black communities is that look, you have to come together and attack the policies and attack what they're doing. Marching and all that stuff don't do shit. It don't. You can march, you can protest, unless you're changing the paperwork, the policy, these corporations will continue to work you to the bone. And that's what they do. That's why I'm working on getting my own business and not needing these corporations anymore like that. Just use them for what I can use them for. And be straight. Because that's all they do. They use us all up, and then when it's time for us to go, they let us go. They'll throw you a little party and everything saying happy retirement, and then they don't care no more. They kick you out, and then they get back to business as usual. That's what I'm saying. Like, these corporations do this. In the unions, sometimes the unions are real soft where they allow this shit to happen. They don't even step up. They just let the shit happen and run you to the ground, and you tired. You barely can wake up. You barely can move around, and then they get mad at you talking about why weren't you here for such and such. It's like, dog, because I'm tired. I tried to get here on time, but I am tired. My body, I can't push my body. Sometimes when you get older, your body is changing. Your body is getting tired. So that's why I stress to young kids and young men and women, look, this is what you need to do. Get a trade, get a skill. I talked to my niece, my oldest niece, Gogo. I love my baby. That's my baby, my big baby. And I told her, I said, look, get you a skill. You got your skills in drawing. You could play the violin. You could do all this stuff. Don't put yourself in a box like your Uncle Harry did. Don't do it. Because soon as you do it, you done. There's nothing you could do. You're gonna be stuck and obligated to get to this 9 to 5, work the hours they give you, and you can't go over hours because if you go over hours, they're gonna have a problem with you. They're gonna monitor you closely to make sure you're doing everything it takes to get that thing done in a timely fashion. But they always put you in position to fail, so you have to overcome it. So I'm not gonna buy Frito Lays. I slipped up and bought some yesterday because I didn't know. I didn't know about this. It just popped up on my feed. But yeah, let's boycott the Pepsi products and the Frito Lay products. Make sure you guys look and see because Frito Lay makes other chips besides Fritos. So please pay attention and see what they support and what they don't support. I mean, don't support that. Excuse me. Just make sure you see what's going on and make sure that you're doing the right thing. But the biggest thing they need to do is change the policies. So I would go at the politicians in the House of Representatives. I would write a long letter featuring every worker there, or also you can put some money together to talk to them. Now you could talk to the mayor or the board of directors, but they're not going to do anything. That's for like laws like in your city, in your town. So what you need to do is go after, you have to talk to people that's on a higher level in your company. So make sure you guys support this. We're not buying no Frito Lay products or PepsiCo products. So make sure you guys stick to that. Thank you for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, share this. Hit the notification bell to select all to receive upcoming notifications. And if you love what you hear, you can donate to the page by Cash Apping me at the word welcome, the number 2, and then HDIITV. Thank you for listening, and we are out. Deezy.